So good afternoon. Let's get started talking about deploying Windows 10. I've been doing similar sessions to this at the last several Ignites. It feels like I've been doing this for, well, a long time, because I have been doing this for a long time. But this one's a little different because so much has changed over the last few years. It used to be that deployment was a discussion about imaging and MDT and OSD and Pixie and all these types of things. And while that stuff is still around, the focus is shifting. We've gotten into these discussions now about modern IT and how to change things. And that's become the new focus for the deployment process overall. I mean, everyone has seen over the last few years that the way we're looking at IT is changing. We've got multiple different types of platforms out there. We've got devices that are owned by the end users themselves, your customers, the business. We have all kinds of cloud activities. It's definitely not the same environment that we had even 5 years ago. So we're starting to look at a comparison of that old classic way of doing things, which we've been doing for, gosh, pretty much unchanged for almost 15 years, compared to a much more modern way of looking at the same thing and seeing a need to make a transition from one to the other. Now, as you've probably seen in some of the discussions so far, even at Ignite, we want to provide more of a bridge to get you from one to the other. So it's not about changing overnight from a classic way of doing things to a modern way of doing things. Instead, we want to look at this as more of a combination, that we can use these things together to provide the necessary capabilities regardless of the scenario. But when we get into these modern scenarios now, we can start looking at different ways of segmenting your population of devices and population of users. Over the last 2 years, we've been talking about this from a kind of a horizontal segmentation perspective of saying, maybe you could treat this group of users one way and this group of users a more traditional way. But now with these co-management scenarios, we are starting to look at more of a horizontal differentiation as well, to say that there are some functions that we may want to provide from the cloud and some functions that we may want to provide on premises. So that will certainly continue as we move forward. When we talk about the Microsoft 365 powered device, we're really tying together all of those different pieces. Windows 10 Enterprise, Office 365 Pro Plus, managed by EMS, Intune, Azure Active Directory, all playing together to give you this desktop experience, running on a modern device, being able to leverage these cloud-based services. When we break down the Microsoft 365 powered device, we generally look at a few different areas. Security is always a big focus. Fortunately, I'm not the security expert. We're not going to focus on security in this session. We're going to focus on the second area, making this easy to deploy and manage. I've got another session tomorrow where we'll get into the always up-to-date piece, but we want to get to a position on the deployment side where we can leverage a bunch of different technologies, including Windows 10 and Office 365 Pro Plus, of course, but also tying in Windows Autopilot, a new capability that we announced just a few months ago. We'll leverage the Microsoft Store for Business, not just for apps, but also as part of the Autopilot umbrella. We'll use Microsoft Intune to manage the devices and to configure the devices. And we'll leverage Azure Active Directory for authentication and kind of a bootstrapping mechanism for this whole process. So that's what we want to get into. We want to explore this new modern way of doing things. But we also have to look at kind of the broader deployment picture as well. We have these cloud-based modern deployment scenarios, these easy deployment scenarios that we want to look at as a new way of deploying new devices. But it's not like you're going to replace all your devices overnight. You also need to be concerned with your existing devices. So we'll also talk about leveraging an in-place upgrade process to get your existing Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 devices upgraded to Windows 10, preserving all your apps, data, and settings. We want to make that process simple, leveraging all of your typical deployment tools to be able to keep those existing devices on the latest OS as well. We still have the traditional tools as well, using the ADK, using MDT, using Config Manager OSD, using WSUS, using all of these other traditional mechanisms, but we want those to kind of be secondary, that there are going to be some special need situations where you want to do that, but the other two should take precedence. For new devices, let's try to get away from imaging and look at easy deployment. For existing devices, let's try to upgrade them to the latest operating system without re-imaging. With that, let's dive in. First, let's talk about easy deployment. Easy deployment is focused on Windows Autopilot. Windows Autopilot is all about looking at the way you set up devices differently. Today, most organizations would get a new device and immediately after they get that device, re-image it. Put their own golden image onto that device, overlaying whatever the OEM would have shipped on that device. Now, the OEMs put a fair amount of effort into putting together a good image to put onto that device, properly tuned for their hardware, with all the necessary drivers, everything ready to go. So by organizations re-imaging those devices, they effectively need to do all that same stuff. They build the operating system image, they gather up all the drivers, they figure out how to apply power settings and to tweak all of the different settings that are needed to get the best behavior out of these new devices. That's a lot of work, and that lot of work means a lot of cost. So that's what we want to try to solve. How do we get rid of all of that work so that we can focus on just taking a device, getting it out of the box, plugging it in, turning it on, and transforming it into an enterprise device? That's what we want to do. Ideally, even keeping IT out of the process altogether. Now, obviously, you've done a lot of work in the background and in the back ends and keeping the systems ready to do this. But we want to keep it so that you don't even have to touch the device. A device in a box from an OEM, from a distributor, from a reseller, you should be able to ship that directly to the end user without sending them a 45-page manual on how to set it up. They should be able to easily get that device out of the box and set it up themselves. That's what we want to get to. Maybe it takes one sheet of paper to explain to them, here's where the power button is, here's how to connect to a Wi-Fi network, here's how to type in your username and password. But that's the extent that we want to put them through. We want the rest to be completely automated to set up that device. That's where Autopilot comes in. Windows Autopilot is all about setting up a new device without re-imaging it. We do have a few different Autopilot scenarios. We'll talk about each one of those, starting with the cloud-driven scenario. We want to be able to register devices in the cloud to say that they belong to the organization, and because they belong to the organization, we can then more tightly control the experience when the user gets that device. We can also do simple IT-driven scenarios. Maybe you want to set up an entire call center of PCs. You don't necessarily need a customized per user experience for those devices. You just want to do the quick bulk setup of those devices. So we can use tools that we provided, like the Windows Configuration Designer, to create a provisioning package that contains all of the settings that need to be applied to the device, and then quickly use that to set up a whole bunch of devices exactly the same way. We also want to be able to extend that to kind of the school scenarios, especially when we get into school scenarios where we don't necessarily have as much IT staff available to help with this process. So we provided a Set Up School PCs app that anyone should be able to walk through, answer a few questions about the organization, like how do you connect to your Wi-Fi network and what's your email address, and use that to create a USB key that they can then take from machine to machine and quickly set up a classroom of PCs. All of these are leveraging the same basic technologies. They're just put together in different ways depending on how you want to set up these devices. We think the most interesting is the cloud-based scenario. This is the golden path where we want to eliminate IT from touching the device altogether. We want a simple process for the end user, and we even want to take this as far as integrating it into the supply chain so that the OEMs, distributors, and resellers, when they sell you the device, can automatically assign that device to your organization to say, this is mine, and therefore, when it gets plugged in and turned on for the first time, here's the experience I expect. We leverage the Autopilot deployment service to register those devices, Azure Active Directory to authenticate the user to make sure that they belong to the organization. We leverage Intune to then configure the device. So we're leveraging MDM, Intune being the MDM service that we provide, to push the configuration down to the device to transform it into an enterprise-ready device. As part of that, obviously, we need to put Office on the device as well. So we'll talk about how you do that with Office 365 Pro Plus to leverage Intune to put Office onto the device as well. So when we look at Autopilot, the steps that we need to go through are pretty simple. We need to register the devices to say that this device with this ID belongs to the organization. We need to then assign a profile of settings to those devices to say, here's how we want that device to behave when it boots up for the first time. Now, this isn't a complex set of configurations. This is just a few options that you have to simplify the device. Just registering the device will simplify most of the experience, but you get a few additional choices like, I want to skip the privacy settings that the user would be prompted to confirm during the initial out-of-box experience. I want to skip the EULA because, hey, I'm going to accept that on behalf of the organization. I want to limit the rights that the user has to the machine. Don't give them admin rights. Just set up the device and make sure that they're a standard user. So we provide that sort of settings to customize and simplify the out-of-box experience. If we look at this kind of from the bigger picture, we can see the flow and the pieces and how they move about. The first thing that we need are the IDs of the devices. The device IDs are basically a hardware hash for the device that uniquely identifies that device. It's a 4K blob, it's kind of opaque, it's just a whole bunch of random characters. Not really random, but you need to gather that ID in order to define that device to Autopilot. Ideally, that comes from the OEMs, distributors, and resellers, which is why we're working with all of those to automate this process so that they can define the devices to your organization on your behalf. In the near term, if you wanted to try this out, you can also gather these hardware IDs yourself. You can put the machines onto a bench, you can boot them up, you can run a script. That script can gather the hardware IDs. Whichever way you go about doing this, you can then upload that list of hardware IDs into the Autopilot deployment service and then configure the profile of settings that goes along with that. That's really all that you need to do. Once that's done, you can take the device, ship it to the end user, and they can walk through the rest of the process. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Using a virtual machine to kind of walk through this process. We can start off in Hyper-V with a machine that's already been defined to Autopilot. So I've already run a script on this to capture the hardware ID and upload it to Autopilot and apply a profile of settings. The machine boots up for the first time, and we'll go through some initial prompts, some things that happen before the device connects to the network. We need to choose a region. We need to choose a keyboard layout and a second keyboard layout, but we can quickly skip by that one. And at that point, if this were a device that were on a Wi-Fi network, we would need to connect it to the Wi-Fi network. But in this case, my virtual machine was wired, so we can go ahead and check with the Autopilot service to see if this device belongs to an organization. And if it does, we'll skip the rest of the Ubi things and just ask you for your email address, which is your Azure Active Directory account. You can type in your email address, type in your password, authenticate to Azure Active Directory, which then causes the device to join Azure Active Directory, be enrolled in Intune, and then reboot to continue the process. At that point, the user gets signed into the device. You see the first login experience with the pulsing blue screen, and the device begins to be configured by Intune running in the background. Now, that configuration could take a while depending on how much software you want to push down to the device. Settings can come down pretty quickly. The software is going to depend on how much software you're pushing and your network speed and other various things. So this isn't a real-time view of this. This is kind of the condensed version, because while I could probably talk for a long time, talking through a 20-minute video that shows this is not something you want to sit through. But at this point, the device gets configured, the software gets installed, and we're left with a configured machine with apps installed, with settings configured, with the device joined into Azure Active Directory, and even with OneDrive for Business set up. If we look at the particular device, we can see here that the end user doesn't have admin rights, because if she did, it would say administrator under there. We can see the device is joined to Azure Active Directory, and it's being managed by Intune. We can see what settings have been applied, what software has been pushed down, and we can even go in to see what version of Windows is this running. Initially, a device, when it's shipped from the OEM, is going to run Windows 10 Pro. We don't want Windows 10 Pro. We want Windows 10 Enterprise. So as part of this process, we automatically step up the device from Windows 10 Pro to Windows 10 Enterprise transparently. You don't have to do anything. There's not even a reboot required to do that. And all your data is there, because in the background, we've synchronized OneDrive for Business using placeholders so that you can see your file structure even before all of those files have been downloaded to the machine. So from your perspective, everything's ready to go. You can just double click on a file and it will launch in Office, and you can continue off doing whatever else you needed to do. That's the process, that's the experience that we want the end user to see. That from the time they got the device out of the box until the time that they were productive can be nice and short. From an IT perspective, you didn't do anything with that device. You didn't have to touch that device. We want the OEM, the distributor, the reseller to define that device for you to say it belongs to the organization. We do have another session tomorrow that Sid Mantry is presenting. Sid owns the engineering of the Windows Autopilot feature. So if you want to dive even deeper into Autopilot, be sure to check out that session tomorrow. So let's look a little bit more at the Office side of things, because that was something that until just a few months ago, with the release of Windows 10 1703, wasn't easy to do. Deploying Office using Intune was a bit of a pain. Now with 1703, we've made that as simple as possible. We built support into Windows 10 to be able to install Office from the cloud. To do that, it's as simple as going into the Intune console and saying that we want to create a new application, specifying an application type of Office 365 Pro Plus, choosing the Office components that we want to install, specifying things like the language, the architecture, the servicing branch that we want to use. So we just specified a key set of settings for Office, and the application is created. At that point, we just say that we want to deploy that to all users, and Intune will then take care of installing Office 365 Click to Run as part of the device setup process. Office can be streamed from the cloud as a fairly sizable download, but it will download in the background. You can actually launch the Office applications before it's even all on the device, and it's ready to be used by the end user. So it makes that process as easy as possible to get Office onto the device. There's another session that Sid and Mayan are talking about kind of that Windows 10, Office 365, co-management, all of those scenarios tied together on Thursday, so definitely check that one out as well to get deeper into a view of how do all these pieces work together, especially when we get into the co-management phase of using Intune and Configuration Manager at the same time, because you can start to do some really interesting things in those scenarios. If you want to understand more about the MDM capabilities that are built into Windows 10 and how those are used as part of this whole autopilot and modern management device setup, there's a session on Tuesday afternoon talking about that as well, with Mamta Tanvir and others getting much deeper into the capabilities that are built into Windows 10 for MDM. So let's look at the next piece of the puzzle. If you were an organization and wanted to define devices to the Windows Autopilot deployment service, you use the Microsoft Store for Business to do that. So we're not talking about Microsoft Store for Business for deploying apps, although you can certainly do that. There's certainly benefits for doing that. What we're talking about here is using the Microsoft Store for Business as a way of maintaining your list of devices. You can use the Store for Business to upload those device IDs, to create the profile settings that you want to apply to those devices, to configure those devices for autopilot. If we look at what that looks like, you would basically sign in to the Microsoft Store for Business. Once you've signed into the Store for Business, you can click on Manage and choose Devices, and you get to a screen that shows you the full list of your devices that have been defined. You can then say that you want to add devices and browse to a CSV file. That CSV file is basically a list of hardware IDs for the devices that you want to upload. You upload those devices into Autopilot. You specify the group that you want to put them in so that you can try to keep them arranged into somewhat logical groupings. Once you've done that, the device is added and you can apply a profile to it. So you can choose from available profiles if you have any, but the first time you're going to have to create one. So you create an Autopilot profile where you specify the settings that you want to use. Just defining the device gives you the initial set of optimizations. Turning off the Cortana screen, turning off the OneDrive setup, turning off any OEM registration pages during the initial out-of-box experience. Automatically choosing the work versus school question, because on Windows 10 Pro, it asks you, is this a home device or a work device? Well, obviously, it's registered with the organization, therefore, it's a work device. We'll also brand the sign-in experience, so it won't say, type in your email address for Azure Active Directory. It will say, welcome to Contoso, type in your email address. So you get that customized experience. They recognize that this device is being set up for the organization. We then have two options today that you can choose from. One to skip the privacy settings, one to disable giving the user admin rights to the box. We'll soon have another one added to this list to skip the EULA. That one will show up hopefully in the next month or so. That will work with Windows 10 1709. So we'll continue to expand out this list of settings to kind of give you a way of pre-configuring some of the things on the device before the MDM enrollment is in place, before Intune can take over the configuration. So Autopilot is all about that initial configuration, simplifying the experience, bootstrapping the device into Azure Active Directory and MDM, and then the MDM service takes over from that point forward. So we create the profile with the settings that we want, and then specify that we want to apply that profile to the group of devices that we want it to be used with. Once that's done, we're now ready to deploy that device. So when that device shows up, connects to the network, and checks in with the Autopilot deployment service, it will see that it's registered, it will understand the profile of settings that have been applied, and it will simplify the experience of that initial bootstrapping process. So if you wanted to try this out yourself, You need to have Windows 10 1703 or above. That's when we initially introduced Autopilot. We do recommend that you have the July cumulative update pre-installed in that Windows 10 1703 OS. It fixes a few of the issues with the initial setup. You need Azure Active Directory Premium, which can be provided as part of an EMS subscription or a Microsoft 365 Enterprise subscription. That is used to then bootstrap the device into Intune or any other MDM service. You probably want to have Office 365 Pro Plus so that you can stream Office down to the device, although that's not absolutely required. You want to sign up for the Microsoft Store for Business, which is easy to do using an Azure Active Directory tenant admin account. Sign into the Microsoft Store for Business site, which then gives you the ability to go in and upload devices. One piece that we haven't talked about yet that we will talk about a little bit later, Windows 10 subscription activation. That's the piece that allows you to step up from Windows 10 Pro to Windows 10 Enterprise. If you set that up, it will automatically take care of that piece for you. So the steps then, you want to take that Windows 10 1703 machine, boot it up, and gather the hardware ID from it. The easiest way of doing that is when you get to the first screen in the out-of-box experience where it will ask you for the region, hit Shift F10, open a command prompt, and then run a PowerShell script to create the CSV file for that device. You can also boot into audit mode if you want. You could boot into the OS altogether and then reseal it. So there are various ways to get to that point, but it needs to be Windows 10 1703. If you try that on earlier versions of the OS, the necessary WMI classes to get that hardware ID don't exist, so it does need to be something somewhat current. So you run the script, which we publish to the PowerShell gallery to create the CSV, and then take the resulting CSV and upload it into the Store for Business. Once that's done, you apply a profile of settings to the machine that you just uploaded, and now you can continue with that device. So if you go through those steps in your lab today, you can try out Autopilot, you can try out this whole end-to-end process. Now we certainly have additional capabilities on the roadmap for Autopilot. Some of you may have seen one of them in the previous session this morning where Brad Anderson showed a device being set up by Intune and displaying progress during that whole process so that you know that it's still, that the device is still being configured. That's something that will be in Windows 10, the Fall Creators Update when it comes out next month. That will require some additional work on behalf of the MDM providers to enable that because the MDM service needs to be able to tell the Windows 10 device, here's everything that I'm going to do, please display the progress as I'm doing that. So you won't see that right away, that will take a little bit of additional time. You'll be able to bypass the EULA, I already mentioned that. That will show up as a new setting in the Microsoft Store for Business fairly soon. That setting will be understood by Windows 10 1709 so that you skip that additional screen. And of course, with every Windows 10 release, we add additional MDM capabilities to give you more configuration options, more capabilities for setting up that device. The big focus with Windows 10 1703 and 1709 is really configuring the security settings of the device. So we'll add things like configuring the firewall via MDM, setting up all the settings that are in the security baselines that we publish. All of those will be possible via MDM as well, so that you can get that device fully configured, fully secured, and ready to be used in the organization. Beyond that, we're also looking at some additional scenarios like support for Active Directory joined devices. Imagine, though, the scenarios that we're thinking about here, where you could ship a device directly to an end user and they set it up for the first time. If they do that from your local Starbucks, they're going to be connected to a public network. They're not going to be sitting right next to one of your domain controllers. So there is some additional work that's being done to make sure that even in that scenario, with the help of Intune or other MDM vendors, we'll be able to get the Active Directory credentials Via Intune, talk to the domain controller, get an offline domain join blob, and pass it back to the machine so it can do the domain join even when it doesn't have connectivity to the corporate network. After that point, then Intune can push down certificates and VPN connections and software and apps and everything else that's needed to make a connection to the corporate network. But it needs to be able to do that initial bootstrapping even when the device isn't on the corporate network. So that will take some more time. You won't see that available immediately, but rest assured we are working on that to enable that scenario with the Fall Creators Update. We'll also provide, in a future release, the ability to assign devices to users. So we would still define the device to Autopilot using the hardware ID, but at the same time say that this device belongs to Anna, so that when the device arrives, they get a personalized experience. It doesn't say, welcome to Contoso. It says, welcome, Anna. Here's your new device. So they get a good feeling about the device. They see that personalized user experience. We'll continue to add more profile settings so that you can configure more things to simplify that initial setup. Things that might be doable via policies, but if they're not done early enough in the process, they might not be effective. A good example is there's a policy to disable the consumerization experience that causes apps to be installed when the user first signs into the machine. If that's not set by the time the user signs into the machine, well, then it's too late because the apps will have already installed. So we will build up a list of settings that would be possible to configure prior to the user signing in, prior to the MDM enrollment being in place, but critical policies that need to be applied to the device early. We'll add support for multi-factor authentication. So we could get to a point where the user doesn't even need to type in their email address and password. All they need to do is pull up their phone, run the Authenticator app, and type in their PIN to confirm that they've received their device, they are who they say they are. Please continue with setting up the device. We also want to take this further to be able to completely set up a device with no interaction at all. Imagine that you have thousands of kiosk devices that you want to set up. You don't even want to go to each one of those and try to type in the user ID and password. You just want them to configure. So we would be able to set up a device in the Autopilot deployment service to say, automatically deploy this device when it shows up. Don't ask any questions, don't have any user interaction, just go. So you turn the device on after you plugged it in. Maybe you need to connect it to a Wi-Fi network manually if it's not a wired connection, but after that, the device sets itself up. That's where we'll get to. So that's the cloud scenario. Now let's switch to the IT-driven scenario using the Windows Configuration Designer. A lot of people initially ask the question of, all right, I understand that cloud scenario, but where's the provisioning packages in this? There are no provisioning packages in that cloud scenario. Everything's coming from Intune. Intune's doing the work to configure the device. But for some scenarios, you might not want to do that. You may want to build a configuration package that does the exact same stuff that Intune would have done. So we have a tool for that. The Windows Configuration Designer enables you to create a standalone configuration package. Behind the scenes, what that package does is it takes those settings and feeds them to the MDM agent on the machine. So it ends up doing the exact same thing. It's just initiated differently. That's why we call it an IT-driven scenario, because you had to create the provisioning package and you had to figure out how to deploy that provisioning package to the machine. In the cloud scenario, we take care of all that for you. So there are valid scenarios for doing this. The main key technology for that is the Windows Configuration Designer. The Windows Configuration Designer tool is available in two places, actually. It's available as part of the ADK, so you can download the ADK and install it and get the tool from there. But we've also published it to the Microsoft Store. So you can go to the store and install it. It's set up using the desktop bridge, so it can be installed and kept up to date automatically by the Microsoft Store. Once you've installed it, you will see a variety of simple wizards that enable you to create a provisioning package to set up the device. These really aren't designed to completely configure the device. These are really designed to do just enough configuration to bootstrap that device into a management service. You want to get that device managed so your management tool can take over the remaining configuration on that device. Maybe that's System Center Configuration Manager, maybe that's Intune, maybe you're just going to manage it using GPOs and Active Directory. Doesn't matter how you're going to do it, this is just supposed to be enough to configure the device to get it to that managed state. So if we look at the first wizard to provision desktop devices, we can launch the wizard, giving the name to the project that we're defining. At that point, we can specify a naming pattern to be used for the machine, typically a prefix and then either a random number or the serial number. We could optionally put in a product key, but most of the time we're going to do volume license activation on that machine, so we don't need to type in anything if we don't want to. We can say that we want the device to be configured for shared use, which is primarily a school scenario. If you haven't looked at the shared PC mode that's available in Windows 10, I believe 1607 and above, that shared PC mode optimizes the machine so that it can be quickly used by whoever picks it up and uses it. Think of a classroom where you have a cart full of PCs and the students walk in for a particular class and they grab a PC off of the cart and they sign into it. You don't want that to take 5 minutes. You want that to take more like 30 seconds. So shared PC mode optimizes that to get that initial logon on the device, which is probably going to happen every day when the student picks up a different device, down to something reasonable so that they can immediately start learning instead of staring at a pulsing blue screen waiting for that initial logon to happen. So we can set up shared use just by flipping a switch, and we can also specify that we want to remove pre-installed software. There's a lot of devices that you buy come with trial versions of security software and other software pre-installed that you may not want. So we have this ability to do a PC cleaning where we will reset the device, which takes about 20 minutes, but in that reset process, discard all of that extra software. So it comes back up as a nice clean PC with just Windows and the drivers necessary for that device. And then the rest of the provisioning package is applied to finish configuring that device. We can specify that we want to set up a wireless network connection if we need to. We can specify how we want to set up accounts on that device. Maybe we want to join Active Directory. In that case, we need to put in the join details for the Active Directory domain. Maybe we want to just create a local account. We can do that as well. Specify a user ID and password to create locally. Or you can specify to enroll in Azure Active Directory. If you do Azure Active Directory, we need to generate a bulk enrollment token. So there's a button here where you click to get a bulk token, and it launches a wizard where you type in an email address and password for an Azure Active Directory account. Once you put that in, it will generate a token and return that token back to the configuration designer to embed that into the provisioning package. Those tokens have a limited time frame. They're good for a maximum of 30 days. So you may need to update the provisioning package periodically with a new token. But anyone with that provisioning package containing that token can use that to join an unlimited number of devices into your Azure Active Directory environment. So you may want to password protect the provisioning package. You may want to encrypt the provisioning package just to make sure that no one gets that token. Once you've done that, you can add any applications that might be necessary to bootstrap that device. You probably don't want to get carried away with this because, again, we want the management tool to take over and eventually finish configuring the device, but maybe there's some software that needs to be installed before the device can even connect to the corporate network, and do that management activity. So we can put software into the provisioning package so that it's installed as part of that. Now the installation capabilities, the software installation capabilities built into the Windows Configuration Designer are pretty simple. That yes, you can define a list of applications, but each application can have one file, basically single file MSIs or single file executables, and the command line that goes along with that. So to set one of these up, you'd specify the application name, browse to the content, specify the installation command line, and then everything gets bundled into the provisioning package. We might need to specify some certificates in order to connect to the Wi-Fi network or for any other purposes, like maybe you need to add a trusted root cert so that later you'll be able to accept any certificates that are specific to that domain. And at that point, you're ready to generate a provisioning package. So you have the configuration in place, you specify that you want to generate it, optionally with a password or with encryption, and at that point, you're left with a PPKG file, a provisioning package file that you can put onto a USB key and use with any number of machines. Now there's a variety of ways that you can use that provisioning package. You can embed it in an image if you're still doing image-based deployments. You can put it on a USB key, and in the first UBI screen that pops up, hit the Windows key 5 times, and it will allow you to browse for a provisioning package on that USB key. You can manually install it. You could sign into a PC, you can double-click on the file, it'll install. You can go into settings, you can browse to it. So there's various ways of installing it. Most of them are manual, with one exception. You can install these via PowerShell as well. So you can create a provisioning package and then run a PowerShell command to install that provisioning package. So maybe you already have a provisioning process using MDT, using a task sequence, who knows what the process is, and you just want to leverage some of the capabilities of a provisioning package. You can integrate that into your existing provisioning process as well. So process number 3 then, set up school PCs, same basic scenarios, but instead of using the Windows Configuration Designer, we want to use the Set Up School PCs app. That app's available in the store, you can download it and install it. When you run that application, basically it walks you through a 3-step process of doing the configuration, where you first sign in to Azure Active Directory. Basically you specify your an account that enables you to get an Azure Active Directory token and also has the benefit of doing some other things. So you sign in, specify your account, and then do the same types of things that we did through the Windows Configuration Designer. Maybe we want to set up a Wi-Fi network. We can add the school's network to that, and then go to the next step, where we can specify a naming pattern for the device, basically a prefix that we want to use for the devices. It'll automatically use the serial number for the rest of the name. We can specify key settings like, should we remove all the apps? Should we clean the PC like we had talked about before? Should we allow users to save files locally, or should they only be allowed to put files onto OneDrive? Should we set up shared PC mode? Or should we configure the device so that it's designed to be used by a single person? Should we set up guest access? What does guest access mean? Well, on a device with these shared PC mode capabilities, we can set up the ability to use a Windows device without even signing into it. There'd basically be a link on the initial sign-in page where you click it and you're immediately at the desktop. You're not signed on as any account at all. You can run whatever apps are pre-installed on the device, you can launch a browser, you can quickly do whatever you need to do, and then sign back out to the lock screen again. So those are all options that you can choose. You can specify the desktop wallpaper that you want to customize the machine. You can set up a test-taking account. The schools often need to administer online tests to their students, but you can't just give them a PC and say, go to this URL, because guess what? Google's your friend, Bing's your friend. It answers all the questions for you. So instead, we need to set up a restrictive session where all they can see is the URL for the testing So you can specify a test-taking account. You can enable that. You can do things like disabling automatic suggestions when you're typing in a word. Like if it's a spelling test, you don't want Windows to be suggesting the right spelling to you. So there are things that we need to be able to turn off to enable that. But all that can be configured as part of this application. We can then choose from commonly needed education apps. So you can just check the box to say, here are the apps that I want to install as part of the device setup, as part of the installation of this provisioning package. Eventually, we get to a point where we can review the settings, and then lastly, say that we want to generate a USB stick. So it's going to create a provisioning package, put it onto a USB stick for you, so that you're then ready to take that USB stick from machine to machine to set up a classroom full of devices. So once we say that we want to save to a particular USB key, it goes through the generation process and then basically says, hey, would you like to do this again? Because maybe you need multiple USB keys and you're going to use them for different classrooms. So it's designed to be as simple as possible. We want this to be a really easy way of setting up a classroom full of devices. There's more on that in Craig's session, actually, which is going on at the same time. So if you wanted to check out that session, check out the video because it will be online shortly. So let's talk then about some supporting features. What do we need to make autopilot and some of these other scenarios work? One of them I already referred to a couple of times, Windows 10 subscription activation is new with Windows 10 1703. It enables you to use Azure Active Directory for license management. So you can actually assign a Windows 10 Enterprise E3 or E5 license to an Azure Active Directory user, and anytime they then sign in to a Windows 10 Pro device, it automatically becomes Windows 10 Enterprise. No extra work. If by chance the license is later removed or if the license expires, doesn't matter, the machine will later step back down to Windows 10 Pro and everything's good. That's available to anyone who has a Windows 10 Enterprise E3 or E5 subscription through an enterprise agreement, through MPSA. It was actually available for Windows 10 1607 for those that are using the CSP channel. So if you're going through a partner and a partner has purchased Windows 10 Enterprise E3 licenses for you through CSP, you could have already done this with Windows 10 1607. We extended it to enterprise agreements and MPSA with the 1703 release. There are a few steps necessary to set this up. The first couple are a little tedious. You have to submit a purchase order to us to buy something that's free. So you've already bought Windows 10 Enterprise E3 and E5 subscriptions as part of your EA or MPSA agreement. But if you've got an EA agreement, you need to purchase a $0 SKU. So talk to your licensing expert, talk to your LAR, and tell them that you need to order this thing. The documentation online tells you exactly what that thing is. It gives you the part number, it gives you the description of it. So you submit a purchase for that. That generates an email that goes to your licensing administrator. Your licensing administrator is basically someone inside of your organization who said that, yes, I'm responsible for Microsoft licensing in this organization. So they get an email message. The purpose of that email is to tie that order and that agreement to a specific Azure Active Directory tenant. So they'll get that email and then they'll need to sign in with an Azure Active Directory account to make the link between those two. Because you could have multiple Azure Active Directory tenants. You could have, well, we don't know which tenant is the one that you want to use with this. So we put that burden on the tenant admin, the volume licensing admin for your company. But once they've gone through that process, you then end up with a Windows 10 Enterprise E3 or E5 license inside of Azure Active Directory that you can assign to users just like you would do an Office 365 Pro Plus license or an EMS license or an Azure Active Directory Premium license, doesn't matter. So you get that in there and then you can assign licenses however you assign licenses for those other things. That can be done using the Office 365 portal. That can be done using the Azure portal. That can be done using PowerShell commands. However you assign licenses, all of those mechanisms will work with these Windows 10 Enterprise licenses as well. We do have a session on Wednesday, Kamal and I, where we'll talk for 45 minutes just on this topic, showing you what that user experience looks like, but fairly obvious that once you sign in, it becomes Enterprise, showing you what those licenses look like inside of Azure Active Directory, and making sure you understand that flow of how to purchase that $0 SKU, how it gets added to Azure Active Directory, and what those emails even look like. So we'll show you templates of what those would look like for the licensing administrator. So check out that session. One other new capability that we're working on for the Windows 10 Fall Creators Update release is something that we call Windows 10 Automatic Redeployment. A rather uninspiring name, you can blame me for that one, but the basic idea is to be able to take an existing Windows 10 device that you've been using for a while and repurpose it for something else. Imagine that you've got a school that's using a room full of PCs for a semester for one particular class, and the next semester they're going to use it for some other class. They just want to start clean, but they don't want to re-image the device because that takes an IT person a week's worth of time to redo a whole room full of machines. So instead, we can set up the device so that you can just hit a special key combination and initiate a reset of the device. But this isn't a normal reset of the device because it's going to preserve some things. It's going to keep track of the Azure Active Directory join information, the MDM enrollment, the certificates, the Wi-Fi connections, the critical information that's needed to get that device back onto the network, back to a managed state, so that Intune or whatever management tool you have can then reconfigure that device for whatever its next purpose is. So you can just walk up to the machine, hit Windows Control-R, sign in with an admin account to say, yes, I really do want to reset this device, and then move on to the next PC. So using something like that, you can whip through a room full of PCs in just a few minutes to get them ready for their next purpose. In order for this to work, you do need Windows 10 1709 or later, Fall Creators Update. There is a policy that needs to be applied to the machine to enable this. It'll be off by default. You can set that via MDM. You can set it via provisioning policy, provisioning package. You can also manually set the registry key. Any mechanism works to enable it. It does require today Azure Active Directory. It's not supported yet with Active Directory devices, although we're working on that. And as far as the administrators that can initiate this, right now those administrators are basically anyone who can join a device into Azure Active Directory. So don't turn this on if you allow every user in your organization to join devices to Azure Active Directory. It's kind of school focused. In a school environment, you're typically only going to let the teachers and the IT staff join devices into Azure AD, not the students. So effectively, this policy means that those people can initiate the resets, but the students can't. Imagine doing this in an organization like Microsoft's, where we have 100,000 people that can join a device into Azure Active Directory. If we enabled this, that would mean any of those 100,000 people could walk into my office and reset my PC. I don't want that. So be careful with that one. We are looking at adding MDM support for this as well. With the MDM support, we would be able to initiate this remotely from Intune. At that point, we wouldn't need the keystroke. We wouldn't need to enable that policy on the device. We could just go into the Intune console and say, reset that room full of machines. Get it ready for use with another batch of users. But don't do the normal reset, because the normal reset would get rid of the Azure Active Directory join and the MDM enrollment. It would start clean. Here we want to preserve that so that the device is still managed. So if we look at what that looks like, imagine that you're on a device that is managed. So we can go into the Settings app and we can see that this particular device is managed, that there have been policies applied to the device, there have been applications installed on that device. If we sign out, we can then get to the lock screen. On the lock screen, we can press the key combination. that Windows Shift R key combination to get to a place where we can type in an admin account. In this case, I'll type in my tenant admin account and password, and it displays a message then saying redeploying Windows. So at that point, it's initiating the reset process, but it's kept track of the Azure Active Directory join, the MDM enrollment, the certificates, the Wi-Fi connections, and everything else needed to get that device back to a clean but managed state. The device will reboot. It will go through the full reset process, which will typically take 20 to 30 minutes on a machine. After it's done, you get to a point where you can sign back into the device and start over. That's the goal. So this is obviously compressed a little bit so that it goes through a little bit quicker than 20 to 30 minutes. And at the end, we'll be able to check to see that it is indeed still a managed device. Almost there, 99%. One more reboot to put the settings back. We're at 96%. Give it a couple of seconds. Hopefully it will finish up here soon. 100%. Now we are back to the lock screen saying success. Windows is set up and ready to go. We can then log in again, typing in any Azure Active Directory ID and password, and we go back through the initial first logon experience where we'll see the welcome and pulsing color screen because this is a clean screen, a clean machine. The user signing into the device for the first time. After that's done, we can go back in and see that the device is still enrolled. Now, the nice part about that is from an Intune perspective, from a management tool perspective, even from an Azure Active Directory perspective, this is still the same device. It's not that we rejoined the device or re-enrolled the device, it's that we preserved the exact enrollment details. So all the existing policies would still be in place, all the existing IDs would still be in place. There's nothing to clean up in Intune or in Azure Active Directory, which would be a problem if you just did a normal reset. So at this point, we can launch the Settings app. We can see that the device is still being managed. We go under Accounts and then Worker School. We can see that it is joined to Azure Active Directory and it is still being managed by Intune and the same policies are being applied to that device. If we really wanted to check, we could even compare the identifiers in Intune and on the machine to see that there's no duplicate objects, that it is still the same managed device. Okay, so let's shift then to topic number 2. If we go back to the original slides, we talked about 3 things. How do we do easy deployment? Well, we want to do that with autopilot. So let's put that one aside. How do we do existing devices? We want to upgrade those. We want to use an in-place upgrade process. In order to do an in-place upgrade process, we want to let Windows do the bulk of the work. We do recommend that you at least consider this. Now, there are going to be some scenarios where this isn't going to work. I mean, if you're going to try to change from x86 to x64, okay, you can't do this. If you're going to do significant reconfiguration, maybe you're going to reinstall new versions of all your apps at the same time. Well, maybe it's faster to do a wipe and load in that situation because you don't want to do a 20 to 90 minute in-place upgrade and then spend another 2 hours reinstalling software packages. But in the scenarios where you're already in pretty good shape, that your machines are well behaved, running Windows 7, all the apps are good, we just want to lift them to Windows 10 with an in-place upgrade where you run setup.exe and tell it to keep everything and move me to Windows 10. It will install a clean Windows 10 image. So we use the Windows 10 media, contains an install.wim that is extracted, placed onto the machine, and then all of the settings, apps, and data are migrated into that clean OS. So it's pretty reliable. It's fairly bulletproof. If anything goes wrong during this process, it rolls back to the original operating system, Windows 7, Windows 8.1, whichever version was on there. It's supported by WSUS, so you can push this out in bulk. It's supported with System Center Configuration Manager using task sequences. It's supported through the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit using task sequences. It's supported by pretty much any third-party management tool that can run setup.exe with a bunch of command line parameters on it. Because that's really all it's doing behind the scenes. It's running setup.exe/auto upgrade saying, I want to take this machine and upgrade it to Windows 10. We've added a few things to improve some of the scenarios, like moving from BIOS to UEFI. Originally with Windows 10, a lot of people said, yeah, we would consider doing an in-place upgrade, but we also want to change these devices from BIOS emulation to UEFI natively so that we can enable security features like secure boot. Well, we couldn't initially do that, but we did release with Windows 10 16.07 a new tool called MBR to GPT. MBR to GPT enables us to convert the disk layout from MBR to GPT, hence the name, so that you can then run the OEM tool to flip the firmware settings from BIOS to UEFI and reboot. So in a period of about 2 minutes, you can take a machine running Windows 10 in BIOS emulation and turn it into a Windows 10 device using UEFI and turn on secure boot at the same time. So that tool is available. It can be integrated into task sequences with Config Manager, with MDT. I've posted some blogs about how to do that. They'll walk you through the steps. There's also a video from Desmond Lee out on YouTube, so if you want to see the full overview, watch his YouTube video. We've also added the ability to work with third-party encryption software. Initially, with Windows 10, when we first released, you couldn't upgrade a machine encrypted using anything but BitLocker. Obviously, there's lots of third-party disk encryption tools out there, and discounting all of those limited the applicability of this whole scenario. So we added support for a new command line switch called Reflect Drivers. That Reflect Drivers switch enables ISVs to provide a folder of files that setup will automatically inject into the process to make sure that we can keep the device encrypted all the way through. There are a number of ISVs that have then provided support for this, so check their knowledge bases. They generally include the full instructions for what you need to do to make that work. We also added a capability that I'll tell you not to use, but hey, it's there anyway. You can take an image running, say, Windows 10 16.07, deploy it to a machine, upgrade it to Windows 10 17.03, sysprep it, and then recapture it as a new image and then deploy that. It's really based on feedback from small businesses, small organizations where they have less sophisticated IT staff, that they don't want to rebuild an image from scratch. But I'm sure all of you are using MDT or some other automated way of creating your image, so it's much better to just drop in the new Windows 10 17.03 media, repeat your image creation process, sysprep and capture that, rather than taking an existing image and keep upgrading it over and over and over again and sysprepping it and redeploying it. It is possible, it is supported, but please don't. We also had reports from an MVP who may or may not be in the room, who said, hey, during this upgrade process, you can press Shift F10 and you can do weird things. So we did change that in Windows 10 17.03 to disable Shift F10. So now, sorry, you won't be able to troubleshoot during the process unless you do the opposite of that to re-enable Shift F10 during the process. I mentioned already, this isn't supported if you're going to change from x86 to x64. It's not that the OS can't handle it, it's more that the apps installed on that x86 machine will probably be hopelessly broken after upgrading it to x64, so we don't support that. We don't support upgrading a Windows to go USB stick. We don't support upgrading a machine that's running using boot from VHD, which is fairly uncommon. And while we'll say we don't support dual boot and multi-boot systems, what we would really say is use at your own risk, because it's possible that as part of the upgrade process that it works fine, but the other operating systems that are on the machine may no longer boot after doing that because it could mess up the boot environment. Typically you can fix that, but it's something that you should try out if you really wanted to do something like that. If we look at the process end to end, basically we can create a task sequence inside a config manager to do the upgrade. First thing that we need to do for that task sequence is we take a copy of the Windows 10 media and set that up as an OS upgrade package in config manager. Once that's there, we can create a task sequence that uses that. That task sequence allows you to do any type of pre-processing or post-processing as part of that. A common example for a lot of customers is maybe they need to upgrade their antivirus software as part of this process. So before doing the upgrade, remove the current version of the antivirus software, do the upgrade, and then afterwards install the latest version. So you can do those sorts of customizations via the task sequence with the pre and post-processing steps. We can then deploy that out to an existing Windows 7 machine. It starts off in Windows 7. In the config manager case, we can make this available to end users so that they can do this on their own whenever they choose. So I can see the Windows 10 upgrade show up. I can initiate that by clicking install. It confirms that, yes, I really do want to do this, and it will then kick off the process. Now, as part of that process, it's going to download all the pieces of the Windows 10 media to the machine. So we'll see that download process happening, and after that download process completes, it then initiates the upgrade. The upgrade will reboot the machine multiple times, so we'll see the machine reboot into kind of a recovery environment where we will install the new operating system image, extract it, place it on the drive, and then migrate all of the settings back into that new OS before resuming the task sequence to allow you to do any type of post-processing that you want. Obviously, the config manager agent is one of those things that's going to be reset up as part of that process so that the task sequence can continue. After the config manager client is reinstalled, it will reboot, and at that point, any additional steps that you specified finish up, and you can then sign into the device. So it's your first time signing into a Windows 10 device. You then see the standard pulsing blue screens before you can get back to the desktop where you see your desktop wallpaper and all your other settings, data, and applications are all preserved and on the device. So that's the scenario that we want most organizations to look at. The biggest concern for a lot of organizations is really what happens to the applications. Are they all going to work after that? And certainly we put a lot of work into compatibility with Windows 10 for desktop apps, websites, and really everything else. From a desktop application perspective, 99% compatibility is what most customers have been seeing. Now, that's not perfect. We always see that there are a few applications that are affected, and they tend to be things that hook into the operating system at very low levels, like antivirus software and VPN clients and things like that. So definitely check with those ISVs and make sure that they have an update that you can install for those. But most of your line of business apps will just work. And that's because they're built on top of the Win32 API. And that Win32 API really hasn't significantly changed from Windows 7 to Windows 10. If we don't change it, we don't break it. If we don't break it, your applications work. From a website perspective, what we generally recommend now is, well, we have a new browser to contend with, Microsoft Edge. So for a lot of companies that have older websites that require Internet Explorer, you still need Internet Explorer. But you still want the benefits of Edge. You want the faster browsing. You want support for modern web standards. You want all these things. So it's useful to have a dual browser strategy. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. On the modern app side, generally not an issue there. Most of you don't have too many modern apps to be concerned with, these universal Windows apps. From a hardware compatibility perspective, most existing drivers will work. The hardware requirements are identical between Windows 7 and Windows 10, so no big concern there. We do have tools to help out because a lot of customers will ask, well, okay, it works, but is it supported by the ISV? So we have been working on a site, readyforwindows.com, where we give you basically a database of all the apps where the ISV has said, yes, these are indeed supported on Windows 10. The site has more than that, though, because it will also show you a listing of all the different versions of the app that are installed on all the versions, all the Windows devices that have reported telemetry to us. So you can see this version is widely adopted. This version is installed on hundreds of thousands of machines running Windows 10. If it's installed on hundreds of thousands of machines running Windows 10, it's probably working. This version, if it's not installed on a lot of machines, either means that it's very new, or it means that people have abandoned it because it had issues. So it starts to give you clues as to which applications you should focus on and which applications you're probably really good with just because they're widely used, they're widely installed, they're being used on top of Windows 10. So definitely check that out. You can go to the site, you can type in an ISV name like Citrix and see the full list of apps that are available and supported on Windows 10. But we really want to be able to take that a step further. We want to be able to take that information and show you a view for your organization. So we've been working on Windows Analytics now for well over a year to provide information on upgrade readiness. So we can show a combination of inventory from your organization combined with that Ready for Windows data, and also combined with our known list of incompatible software and drivers, so that you can then be able to see which devices in your organization are ready for upgrading and which ones aren't. So we can easily filter that and show it to you. We also have a couple of other analytics components. One is update compliance, which is still in preview. It's designed to show you patch compliance, which of your machines are patched, which ones aren't, and for those that aren't, why aren't they? So we can tell you about machines that aren't updating properly. Device health is the latest piece that we've added. Device health is really designed to tell you when the device isn't behaving as it should. Logon times are too slow, boot times are too slow, applications are crashing, things are happening that are affecting the end user's experience on Windows 10. You can fix those. We can tell you about them so that you know where to focus your efforts to improve the user experience overall. If we look at upgrade readiness, that's the one that I would suggest you all start with, because that one prepares you to get ready for Windows 10. This can be enabled even for Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 to report inventory from your organization into Windows Analytics. Windows Analytics is based on the Azure OMS capability, Azure OMS product. So you can take that data, see it in OMS, and drill in and report on that information. So we can show you the apps and drivers that have known incompatibilities. We can show you the data from Ready for Windows. We can help you guide through that upgrade process. There are a number of sessions on Windows Analytics going on this week. I don't have them all listed here, but there is one that's kind of showing the roadmap of Windows Analytics and how it will be expanded to Microsoft 365. There's one that is on just upgrade readiness, one that's just on update compliance, one that's just on device health, so you can overload on Windows Analytics this week if you would like. So that takes us to traditional deployment, and we have a number of tools available, including the assessment and deployment kit. We will update these with every Windows 10 release. There'll be minor updates, primarily to address compatibility or any bugs that we run into, and to make sure that we add support for the latest operating system versions. We always recommend that you run the latest version to deploy the latest version of Windows, but generally we have compatibility even with previous versions of the ADK, so it's not required to move right away. It's also supported to use a newer ADK to deploy older Windows 10, so you can do some mixing and matching, but generally it's a good idea to try to stay current. We already talked about BIOS to UEFI. Definitely check that tool out. There is additional documentation and the video available to dig into that process, as well as blogs that help you to define a task sequence to do those steps. That brings us to one last slide in the 17 seconds that I have left. Config Manager OSD continues to evolve slightly to add additional OS deployment capabilities. MDT continues to move forward slightly, primarily to address bugs and customer feedback. We will be releasing an updated version of MDT this fall. That version will be available at some point. We're in the process of fixing bugs right now. Config Manager always gets updated 3 times a year, and generally there are some additional OSD capabilities added with each one of those releases. If you have feedback on either one of those tools, please go to the Connect site or to the user voice site for Config Manager and submit feedback on the issues that you would like to see us address. Just one other call out as we finish up here. Windows as a service is a key part to this as well. So once you get to Windows 10, you then have to stay current on Windows 10. That is an effort on its own, and that requires another 75-minute discussion. That 75-minute discussion is one that we will save for tomorrow, because you need to get into this rhythm of deploying these twice per year feature updates as they come out. That session is tomorrow at 12:30, so hopefully I'll see a lot of you tomorrow for that session. Otherwise, please fill out your evaluations. Thank you for attending, and hopefully I'll see you at my sessions throughout the week. Thanks.